Hello, I'm Mike Rochip, Senior Analyst in Square Little Round Things that float across your screen here at MBC. And I've been chosen to introduce you to the inaugural feature on our new series, which we're calling MBC We Think Now Tonight. And this is a new series of important interviews with important people about things that matter. Tonight, we have as our host our beloved Chick Utley, who will be interviewing Greg from Babylon Theater. So let's get right into that interview. And there was one of those floating things right now. Okay. Enjoy the interview. I don't think I did very good.
Good afternoon. This is Chick Utley. And this morning, I'm talking to Greg of Babylon Theater. Greg and I and Bab and Nolan and a few of the others go way back, a long time. So long ago that we've been thinking about hiring an outside investigator to discover how we came to be. Our viewers know we're not going to talk about any of that today. We're going to try and find some middle ground as I talk to Greg, one of the founders, and a good friend of mine, of course, of Babylon Theater. Welcome, Greg.
Hi, Chick. Welcome to you too. Let us all welcome each other. And you bless us, one and all.
You're probably the first interview that we've had for quite some time with the B-Boys. And so I wanted to talk about what Babylon Theater is up to. I understand that you particularly have been talking about transparency. This interview series part of that?
I don't know. I thought that was your series. But if, transparency to me means more like being able to look behind you as you're going along without people noticing. So you put a little transparency across the screen there, and you can do a quick look behind you over your shoulder. So that helps you to it helps me anyway to make sure that I'm keeping my facts straight as I go through a long paragraph of dissertation, where I sometimes forget what I was saying before.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about God, Greg,
because
a lot of the brouhaha seems to head directly towards God.
It certainly does, or something like it anyway.
But do you have a special term for this, for God?
Kind of depends on my mood, Jack. Sometimes I call God Raymond. Sometimes I call God Isabel. It depends sort of on whether I'm feeling romantic towards God or businesslike. I don't feel like God is really too confused by a number of names that I might use, so I feel free to kind of give color to our conversation that way. With me, it's more like saying, I need a hammer to pound this nail in. So when I need God, there's no reason for me to call it a screwdriver. So I just call it God.
I know you at Babylon Theater called it Yui.
I would say that really the only reason to have these different names is for our benefit. I think God probably has his own name for himself, but in general, I feel like just to be able to say, I'm talking to you now. So, so I will say that quite often during the day. In fact, every time I stub my toe, I'll mention it to God, Well, it kind of gives me away as being an older kind of person, because now everybody wants to be referred to as you. You
With good
know,
reason, I think.
so I don't know if God's like that or not. I refer to him as him because that's sort of the kind of voice I hear in my head. If I happen to think that's the voice from God, I haven't really. I don't know. I'm not a philosopher, so I haven't been able to understand it quite yet.
I've been hearing in the Babel 101 series about a number of lesser gods than Yui, and how are they different from Yui?
Uh, you're really kind of getting into a specialty of Nolan's lately. I've been taking cues from him, but if
Mhm.
I can do my best to answer you, I'd say that Yui for us is a very large, multi-dimensional, almost like a big screen up above a rock concert where the screen is up above so the people see it. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
I think Yui is sort of like a big picture of God, not necessarily God itself, but just kind of a transmission of God.
That's a wonderful analogy,
Thank you.
Greg.
Uh,
But I want to talk about the line, Greg.
I can't turn up
It's
my nose, so I
just
have to
like,
roll my eyes.
but it's everywhere. The line,
Yep.
I cross the line, I walk the line.
It's interesting, isn't it? The line is so ubiquitous in our world of mathematics and geometry, and yet the first thing you learn about a line in school in math class is that a line is a one-dimensional object, which is not possible. Everything has to be at least two-dimensional or it doesn't exist. So really, lines are theoretical constructs that don't really exist. So it's kind of hard to talk fruitfully about a line because you can't really find one. The line that we're all talking about is similar to the soup lines of old, where people would stand on the sidewalk and I would come up behind you and say, "Is this the line?" And I say, I think so. I got behind this guy. That's all I know. I think it's a built-in function of our brains. Evolution has brought us to where we can deal with these non-existent constructions, like zero. Take zero for instance.
Mm-hmm.
They'll tell you that zero is not a number, and yet it always starts the number series. You know, you don't have one first. You always have zero, as if it's like a capital T or something as a sentence beginning.
But it's not a number.
It's not
That's
really, no, it doesn't exist as such, but it is a line. It's a circular line. I've always thought that was interesting.
uh, some people say that the real line is the line between the Babel verse and the U verse, YOU verse.
Well, borders and lines have a lot in common, and I think it's reasonable to expect that people will interchange the words in that kind of situation. But really, if you try to build a fence between your property and your neighbor's property, the fence is going to be half maybe on his side and half on your side if you try to put it right on the line. In my uh, community here, we urge people to put the fence over on their side a bit, so that the neighbor, so that it doesn't get into a situation where you're trying to saw the fence in half long ways.
What about the moral value to a line, or some good and evil are say on different sides of the line? Is there a line, a moral sort of line?
Well, morality is a kind of line because morality does not end. It keeps going along its path and it does not bend for fashion. Uh, and a line, as I understand it, and I'm not much for math myself, I have to tell you. I do not do very well in math, but I understand this concept of geometry and lines are used to not only to divide things, but also to enclose things. Uh, we create rectangles and obelisks and I don't know what all, pyramids with lines, but all those lines, they're not segmented lines. You can't segment a line. Once you lay down a line, it goes right down the row and never stops. Whoa, they set up another line over there. Boy, those guys are not
Yeah.
fun. So, but we make rectangles out of lines as if we can snip them off, just like you would a hair or something, or a piece of wood, and try to build a Lincoln Logs with it. But really, a line is not going to end
Does not end.
anytime soon, as far as I know.
Another thought that has come up, or I don't know who brought it up, but I'm going to ask you about it,
Yeah,
Greg,
I'm here. You might as
is
well.
that the line isn't just a straight thing like you just described,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's more of a branching thing.
Oh,
That the entire Babbitt Trail is at core a line.
well, Chick, you've really been doing some studying on this, I can tell, because you're coming up with these terminologies that I hardly have even gotten used to. Nolan has been sort of in charge of that. I mean, he took it on himself to kind of try to make some definitions for us to work with as we try to come to terms with the Theonites and where they are and where we are, and is it a different place or is it the same place? So he's working on terminology for his own self that he's kind of foisting on me as he goes along, and I try to keep up with it. But you're doing much better than I am, I think. You're
Well,
doing.
I've been auditing both of the classes that
Oh,
are being held.
well, it's not me giving the class. It's in my case, it's Dennis Menachie.
You're his department head, I understand.
Yes, I'm the head of his department. I'm the department head.
Before we get offline, Nolan has said all the line is choice. Not that it's only choice, but that's why it's so ubiquitous.
You know, I've started to think that every word that starts with "u," like ubiquitous, is sort of a recalling of the Yui. So it's almost like we should be saying ubiquitous. And I think that's something that Nolan is really good at, was taking a set of letters and parsing them out until there are more of them they can possibly use in one sentence. So, but this one is good. I like it.
By the way, something came up in Rember's class that made me think that the line actually originated with Yui.
You've probably been following us enough to know that I've been reading from the book, A Man Called Oval.
And last, Greg, I've mentioned three topics that I thought were important, and that one is comedy. You have billed yourself at times as modern Babylonian comics.
Right.
You have asserted that the ABC were actually comics,
Mhm.
and that comedy was a spiritual path.
Well, I think that the terms spiritual and path uh, are terms from a long time ago, and most terms from a long time ago have pretty much run their course. So I'm thinking spiritual has become equivalent to science, mathematics, exploration. Uh, in other words, it's no longer necessary to set aside the spiritual world, so to say, from our regular world, but rather we should probably try to take our regular world into the spiritual world and set it down there and leave it there, and then come back and be done with it. However, I'm not sure that the spirit needs a path. I think the spirit kind of goes where it wants to, and spirit being, the root word, I think, of spiritual. Maybe not, but I'm a grammarian. I'm not a linguist.
The ABCs, the ancient Babylonian comics used comedy because they were trying to convey something. They were trying to tell us something. Is that
Yeah.
not what we understand?
Well, I don't know what we understand, but what I understand is that I don't know quite what these ABC really are. This is pretty new stuff for us. I mean, it's only been less than 2 years, I think, since Nolan first got hit on the head by an apple or whatever it was that caused him to notice these ABCs were lurking about, watching our every move, which we hadn't noticed for a long time until then. So we're getting used to it still and trying to figure out what they want from us. And we're trying to be open to it, and we're trying to be good boys, and we certainly appreciate the honor of them calling us to be the MBC. I mean, we didn't make that up. I didn't, at least. Maybe no one did, but he says he heard it from them. So, and I've never actually myself had any personal conversations with any of the MBC. Just reality becomes very blurry to me sometimes, and I forget who I am.
Do you have something to tell the people? And is it funny? I mean, are you still you still do comedy?
Yes, yes, indeed. Everything, Chick, I've often said to people that comedy is my life, and that's still true. Um, but as I get older, I realize that there's more to comedy than just doing funny things. For instance, a, a person that I really respect, a historical figure in recent times, has said in a context that I'm not going to try to recreate, that uh, that comedy is the opposite of gravity. Whereas back in the day, where drama and theater were getting a good start there in England and so forth, they would say that it was comedy and tragedy that were the opposites, and that was how they sort of
Mm-hmm.
put bookends around the theater. But I think it's more fruitful now to think of comedy as being a sort of a law of nature, which is kind of a baffle or a foil to gravity. So when you see when you see a comic or comedian, if you can figure out what the difference is between those two, working on a stage, you should probably bow down to him or at least shake his hand afterwards and say, "Good job," because without you, gravity might be running amok and we would be just splattered right against the ground, not able to move. But when you laugh at something, it kind of lifts you up. So comedy is a lightening, sort of like uh, well,
No, I'm sorry, I don't know, Greg, but we're sort of running out of time. But
yeah.
are you planning on offering classes in comedy?
I don't think so, really, Chick. Comedy is a kind of a sacred uh, mantle one takes upon oneself, um, similar to putting on a hat when you go out in the rain. And really, it's not something that you want to be just explaining away to the point that everyone thinks they can do it, because that would be similar to saying, if we define gravity long enough, maybe gravity will lighten up a bit.
Well, Greg, I've learned a lot about comedy and about you. Even though I've known you all these years, something new comes up every time we talk. It's been really good talking to you.
Thank you, and you as well.
Before they cut me off, Greg, I'm going to cut us off. This is MBC We Think Now, tonight, signing off.